Welcome to the All In, All Out podcast. My name is Shannon Ross, founder and executive director of The Community. This podcast is focused on the goal of creating a justice system more worthy of that name, and why you, no matter who you are, should care. The name of the podcast refers to the fact that we must be all in and go all out to truly address the way justice is viewed and applied in America. Furthermore, the sense of separation the system imposes is an illusion. What happens to individuals on both sides of the fence is connected and tied to the same fate. How we treat incarcerated people reflects the state and direction of society. Those inside are all out, and those of us outside are all in. As for me, I am no more than a dreamer who knows there is a better way and is devoted to reaching out and holding on even when it is uncomfortable, because connections and empathy are the foundation of the types of strong, healthy communities that we all want. I spent 17 years in the Wisconsin prison system, where I obtained my bachelor's degree in business administration, had several articles published locally and nationally, co-created a mental health program that now exists in several facilities throughout the state, and founded The Community. Upon release at the end of 2020, I obtained my master's degree in sustainable peace building at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, co-founded a successful multi-dimensional justice solutions firm called Paradigm Shift, became a first-time father, and I'm currently a consultant at Marquette University's higher education and prison program. But these achievements have occurred alongside numerous and constant failures. Therefore, however, remain all in and all out. So today we have Kyle Ashley. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself in a second, but I wanna kind of lay a platform for what we're hoping to talk about today. I remember one time, we've known each other for about 3.5 years, pretty much close to after I got out. Mutual friend connected us, and I remember one time one of the people in my team was making a comment about, I don't think she knew who you were or how it was. You were like a contact on our Instagram page, right? She did our social media, and she was like, "Hey, I think this dude stole your name because it's like Community Glue." I was like, "Nope, not at all. He's actually more probably the Community Glue than we are." So I said, definitely didn't steal. It's legit right there. And so what I'm hoping to talk about is a little bit about a couple of things. One is I want to tie in as much as you are willing to talk about. Not as much. Like I'm sure there's a whole lot about your journey. Like you've got all these different lives that people don't even realize when they meet you. But talk about some of that, about how you went from like in the early stages when you were involved in the hip hop scene to now like really involved in all type of community work. Yeah. In a really which makes sense completely way, yeah. But it might not make sense to most people when they look at the way they might view those two worlds, right? Yeah. So talking about that a bit, and then talk about just what I feel is a really, really important and highly misunderstood topic around collaboration. Why it doesn't happen, how it can happen, which ways it so quickly evaporates. Like that topic, I think, is behind a lot of these questions and comments people get about how Milwaukee's siloed and how people aren't working together. And there's like, when you get involved in the work, you get in some of these rooms or the decisions are being made at, you like, it's a whole lot more going on than I thought. And there's a whole lot more reasons why certain things aren't happening. And so I just want to kind of dive in, because I think you have a really spectacular lens and experience around this topic in particular, especially in Milwaukee. And one more thing I'll point to is that around the silo topic, I was at an event where Shalina was talking at True School one time about how we say in Milwaukee that things are siloed, and she was like, I actually don't think they're siloed at all. She said, I see people working together all the time, and I do see that as well. So it's just kind of coming into it with the lens of all that complexity and your experience is what I'm hoping to address today. Okay. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and kind of talk about like who you are, what you do, if you want to go into whatever that is, as comfortable as you are right now with it.
Sure. Appreciate you giving me an opportunity to come and chat. Kyle Ashley, community engagement professional, I guess would be the most appropriate way to identify me, and I guess my skill set, how I show up in community. I've worked in community engagement in a number of different capacities. Started my workforce journey in workforce development, so I worked for WRTP Big Step for over a decade, and that's where I was raised affectionately in my career. As far as being able to touch so many different sectors, working within the workforce development world, and just seeing how all the donuts were made behind the scenes. Transitioned to technology, where I was working in public health. basically addressing the social determinants of health by way of technology. So you and I had a lot of touch points in that world, and I was able to see the world in a very different way than when I was doing case management, program coordination, / management. So fast forward, I was blessed to be appointed by the governor of the state of Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers, to run his Milwaukee office. And so did that for a little over a year, and I'm in transition right now, getting ready to join the county to do some similar work. So have been blessed to be all over the community, and really, really love like the opportunity to do it. Yeah.
And I think it's the reason why I think are going to these different spaces, if I may give my own outsider view, is that you're incredibly competent in your social network, and your ability to navigate these spaces is uncommon, right? So like people see that and they're like, I want Kyle over here, I want Kyle over here. So with that, how did it get to that space? Like take us back a bit to the beginning that led to this work. Because you didn't come out of high school doing this, I'm sure.
No. So I feel like I got like a Forrest Gump story, right? Like so many different hats that I've been able to wear formally or informally. But I think it starts with family. I went to predominantly Catholic schools my entire education existence. Marquette High School played a big role in how I view showing up and how I like to serve. So my parents always had me volunteer. My mother was in government. She worked for HUD, Housing Authority, Mayor's Office, to name a few. And my father, on the flip side, was just like this ever-present human that was always volunteering at the school, always helping coach teams that I was on. Even if he didn't know how to play the sport, he was just present. And I think that was a great mashup in terms of how I expect to show up, as it relates to community. So I've had so many different touch points. I love people, and I think I identified that working at Target. And that's where I met Devonna, our mutual friend that connected us. But like being able to see people as a cashier coming in on their best days, their worst days, and just being able to spark up an instant rapport with those folks, maybe never see them again, or those regulars that come in every Friday or first of the month or whatever. So being able to deal with people along those lines, I've just always had jobs where I'm like public facing. So I was a bank teller when I was in my early 20s, worked at Guarantee Bank for a number of years, and that's another place where you'll see people on their very worst day. Been cussed out so many times about overdrafts and my account, and just being able to get people back to a place where you can have an effective conversation. That's something that I've practiced a great deal. And then music. Music is probably the greatest tool in terms of how I show up, and the transferable skills in terms of like, we managed a couple of groups. I myself performed, but at the same time, like the city, you talk about silos, the local music scene is not gigantic. And when we were growing up, musically, we would throw our shows on the east side. Stonefly, Quarters, Mad Planet, Timbuktu were the local spots that we perform at most. But you'd have everybody in all these different groups performing. So every place I named, you'd have somebody at those venues performing. And so again, the local scene ain't big. So like, how can we get more than 10 people scattered in this room and half of them are artists, right? Like, how can we get more of the people coming in? So I think the best thing I did in music with our folks was we thought we were, mob style, like whatever. We were rappers. So we invited all the local artists that we could to a dinner at Olive Garden. We reserved a room, paid for everybody's meal, but the conversation was making best use of, the stage that we had, literally and figuratively. And so the agreements that we made in that meeting were that we weren't going to compete with one another. We weren't going to throw shows, when somebody else has a show that night. We were going to show up and pay for folks' shows. We're going to share bills. So, I would add you to my show if I'm performing at, Mad Planet on Thursday night. We tried to mix crowds. We tried to make sure that we weren't pulling local fans away from, events. And so, like, that was the first, I think, touch point where I was like, we could do better together than apart. And so it worked out really well. And a lot of the reason I know so many great people in community is because of Milwaukee music scene. So, yeah.
No, that's a cool story. I didn't even know that. Yeah. So like, the perfect example. It was like early on.
Yeah.
Kind of diving into it. So from that, what do you feel, because you've had like a number of experiences around collaboration since then, what do you feel is key to successfully building and maintaining collaboration?
I think egoless contribution is the word that comes to mind. When you talk about like the obstacles, and this is my personal opinion, when it comes to collaboration, I think that there's so many people that want that, they want that recognition. So they want their name at the top of the piece of paper. If it's something big that we're getting ready to do, they want to be noticed. And I think that for effective collaboration, you have to be more interested in what everybody stands to gain than just, your why you're coming to the table. For me, I was taught to treat your relationships like you treat your bank account. You make more deposits than you do withdrawals. So I don't have a lot of ask for myself, right? And honestly, it's very uncommon. I know when I was asking questions when I first got the job in the governor's office, like how can I use this space? How can I use it, this access for community? And everybody was like, well, what are you gonna do professionally? Because you can advance this way, you can advance that way. I think we're hardwired for our own advancement, our next opportunity, and it completely interrupts the ability to think about collaboration first. Breaking up the pot in a way where I can get my notice so I can think about how I can utilize that for my next opportunity. So I just think that we have to think about the sum of all parts instead of just our own.
Yeah. You almost answered this question that I'm about to ask in that one. Then what are the reasons for failed collaboration? How does that go? Or sometimes effective collaboration falling off.
Yeah. I think that as much as, like, for the collaboration I'm thinking about, some of these things are like really tough issues that we got to tackle. Folks want to, work on racial equity. Folks want to work on, solving early childhood, funding issues and all that good stuff. Those are tough issues to tackle. And when you're coming to a table specifically to talk about an issue and you have no other, place where rapport was built, I think it's really hard to have those tough conversations. I think that there's no brainers, but it's like, how do we get there? One of my mentors told me that not everybody abides by the same law code. And so I think the more that we get to know each other as people, the more that we can get past some of those landmines that naturally occur when you're thinking about collaboration. Or my organization does it this way, or at the end of the month we got this, so we can't meet on that day. I think that just making sure that we're paying attention, at least to who we are as humans, how we're showing up. We rush to these tables. I'm on a bunch of different committees and all of that, and a lot of times we don't even know where people are at as humans, right? Somebody could have just had a conversation with a teacher, about their kid being, a mess in class, and they're rushing to this table to talk about this very important topic, but they're not fully there. Or you got somebody whose funding is drying up, and so their mind is not focused. I think that just making sure that we see each other as humans is something that can create better synergies when it comes to like thinking about work.
Yeah. I got a couple of things going on in my head when you talk about that. One is we have this collective, right, that we're at this building right now called The Beginning, and we're trying to start that right now at the early stages of building out what I'm not going to say is new or revolutionary. Nothing's really new. I'm sure that this same concept has existed. I'm sure it existed in the city at different points. It probably does now. We don't always know what's going on. Yeah. Thrive On is similar. It's a higher level of it. But we have about 7 to 8 organizations in a mix of some completely starting out new in some cases, some legacy groups that are here, and trying to like find the way that we can hold together. And that's why the position that I'm trying to get for this is called what I've been calling, everyone agrees that the name is adequate, is the Chief Adhesion Officer. Because we need somebody who basically their whole job is to make sure that everybody is able to know what everyone's doing, like checking in, like, hey, how are you doing? What do you need? They're doing this, just keep that in mind, like do a newsletter, just kind of make sure everybody is, just like the mom or whoever's running a household, like the dad, whoever that would be, right, running the household, they're making sure all the kids are aware, taken care of. And when you do that, right, then they're able to focus on programs. They're not focusing on like, is my space gonna be gone in a month? Or, am I gonna have to worry about this aspect of security? Or like, we can address that collectively, or one person does it, you just focus on your programming. Yeah. It's like that housing first model for people, same thing is what we're trying to do for like organizations. And within that, it already exists these fractures that I see. Like I'm the main person kind of at the middle of a lot of it. And I'm bit by bit trying to get out of that, because like the more they can exist without me, like the more I can get forgotten about at the beginning of it, the more effective it is, right? And I start, people are writing each other into grants, they're talking about programs, they're working together. But there's also, every time that happens, little things like, I don't know why they did that, or I don't like the way that happened. So like I'm holding all of this information, trying to like make sure I navigate and keep people away at certain times, and all these types of little things that just pop up. And it's so easy. Like when getting in this space, I already knew this, but living it is like, it's a shock that any collaboration exists sometimes. When I see like all the reasons that humans have and create to like distance themselves from something. Yeah. And so I think when I see that, I think about people that have gone through this. What is it that they have seen that are the little things, the little itty bitty things to address and stay ahead of, and which things not to, that you just sometimes got to let a thing fester and it'll work itself out because you can't do anything about it. So in that, like the minutia, what have you kind of seen that stands out as like things to be aware of, or just let it go and just hope it works out because you can't do anything?
That's a good question. I think that asking for, so if there's information that you're receiving, I think it's up to you to ask where you can contribute, where you can tag in, right? And most importantly, where they don't want you to tag in. I'm not a fan of letting things fester just because it can grow into something else. I think that, letting resentment fester is almost poison to whatever collaborative opportunity you have. I'm learning that I'm a bit more harsh when it comes to, I'm okay with conflict. I'm okay with having uncomfortable conversations. I'm okay with, the tough stuff. I think that cultivating like safe space in order to do that. And so like I'm a big person on people mapping and just looking at observing a room, looking to see who's kind of closer to this person. Because at the end of the day, when there is conflict or a misunderstanding that comes up, maybe I can say, Shannon, you go have a conversation with this person because I know that they're not hearing me right now, right? And so I think that our job, folks like you that have so many different relationships and people who have a level of trust with you that they can share, paying attention to who might be the best mediator, for certain conversations. It may not be you, right? I lead with vulnerability, so a lot of times that brings me opportunities to have reconciliation with people, like, or you need to talk to this person. Sometimes I'll leave it alone, right? It's just, to your point, it's not letting it fester, but like, I'm not equipped for this conversation, or I'm too far away from it to be beneficial to the bottom line, or the information that I received is not something that's, I can regurgitate. Somebody told me it in confidence, so you kind of got to sit with it. That's the burden of being, somebody that's trusted. So there's a lot of different ways to go, but I think that as much as you can, if you can have that conversation head on, as long as you're cultivating a safe space for it to be, had, then it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I was telling a group one time, it was actually maybe recent, at one of our recent meetings, because we have bi-weekly meetings that we try to come together and really hold to that. And there was something about a comment about like some beef that somebody had maybe in the area. And somebody's like, well, I don't know, I think we just leave it alone. I said, I don't want to do that, because like that's what every evil villain in every Avengers movie was, right? He was somebody that they just kind of did something bogus to, and nobody went and tried to address it, right? And so like, so those little things right now, like, that'd be all right. Become in 2 years a person that like is a huge problem. So I want to always, but even beyond that, I feel that there's this element to the work that we do, that we are so good at noticing when somebody else is like messing up, but then the second we do the exact same thing, we don't call ourselves out on it, right? And we also are not wanting other people to call us out on it. And that iron sharpens iron component, that accountability aspect of like one of our pillars here, is to me the most important thing. Like if I can't tell you, hey, that's kind of not good, or that you could do better, or that was bogus, what are we doing here, right? We're just all lying to each other, basically, because we're constantly messing up. So we have to be able to face that. And yeah, it's just, I'm always fascinated by that. And then also at the time you talked about the trust, like I imagine, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it's also a lot to carry that. Like when a lot of people trust you, sometimes I'm telling somebody something that I didn't like, oh, I didn't know that was a secret. Like, I thought that was a basic thing, and I'm getting yelled at now. So sometimes in the flow of like being real and vulnerable and like want to be authentic, I might release something that I didn't think was an issue, or that I kind of do, but like this person kind of needs to know it. It's just all these balance things. But I don't know, is it kind of similar with you sometimes?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and it is. It can be painful for us, right? Like you walk into a room and you said you could see every fracture. That's painful because, if you're a good person, part of you or a lot of you probably wants to go and solve that. Let me reach out to this person, have a conversation in silo with this individual and see if there's some place that we can get ahead. I mean, I can name a bunch of different things that I'd like to help solve or put a Band-Aid on, but I think you have to meet people where they are too, right? It's not on what we want just because we see it. I did some professional development training in the DEI space for a while, and one of the most important things when I was learning how to facilitate those groups was making sure that you're holding space for everyone in that conversation, no matter where they are in it. And so we were talking about polarizing things like DEI and racial equity, and sometimes it was organizational, where your org is saying you have to do this, as a compliance thing, or we just think that this is good or beneficial for you as an employee. So you got to meet people where they are. There's some folks that are well versed in DEI, so they come with all the glossary terms, and then you got the other side where somebody's like, I'm on here because they told me I have to be here, right? And I don't believe any of those things. I don't think that this is going to make me a better employee or whatnot. Our job is to hold as much space for them as possible. So, like, I think that that's the most important thing. You have to tap in, or we have to tap into our empathetic side. Like, is this something that this person's willing to have a conversation and being okay with being shut down, right? Like, if you think that I need to fix this right now, or we need to fix this right now, and they're like, I'm not ready for it, you gotta be okay with that.
Or like, hey, it's not your space. Like,
yeah,
all right, like I came in, tried. So yeah, I like that.
And I've learned it the hard way.
Yeah,
many a time, many a time.
Yeah, because it's interesting because I can think of, and I know at times I've felt like this, and I'm positive I've seen it, where somebody comes in and they come in with a good heart, and somebody's like, man, like get out of here, and then like now suddenly they want to beef. Like, I'm just trying to, like, you shouldn't even, so like you got to be able to acknowledge, like, yeah, I tried to come in, they don't want it, so I'm not gonna carry that bitterness and anger. It's cool, like, you don't want it.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely somebody, I think, that has that respect for people's journeys, because I had to go through my own. Right? It was a time when people definitely wanted me to be something that I wasn't ready for, and so living in that space, especially reentry in the criminal justice system in prison, I've seen a lot of transformations that were just real slow. And I have a lot of people that ask me like, oh, my uncle and my brother and my son is inside, and what can I tell them to change? And like, you can't, man. You cannot tell people anything to change. Just be there, encourage them, and just kind of like don't enable. That's another thing, right? Like we do a lot of enabling out of love. Like, no, I'm not gonna send you money. I'm gonna send you books. I'll send you stuff that'll process a certain path, but I'm not gonna help you just be comfortable. Like comfortable is not what you need.
That's
you need a challenge.
Well, and I'll give you something in terms of like, I've always respected the way that you've been able to balance your relationship with systems, right? When you go about doing your work, I think that is something that really illustrates how important collaboration is and being open-minded when you're going and having these conversations. I think years ago, maybe when we first started talking, the relationship between folks who were advocating for changes within the criminal justice system, within the incarceration spaces, for folks coming home, always ran into like it was just two folks running at full speed toward one another. And to see you in spaces with system leaders and vice versa has been, it helps me learn. Like, okay, so somebody's meeting somebody halfway. Somebody's appeasing somebody's love language. And so I think that you got to give yourself a ton of credit for just being able to be a bridge between folks that are mistrusting of systems, and you yourself, who you said you had to get over some of the things that you had to do or that you've seen or been a part of to be able to be an effective communicator or bridge for those conversations. So I just want to give you your flowers while we're here. I think that's super important. Building that balance. This is all a layered approach.
Yeah. Yes, that'd be last. I appreciate that. Yeah. We talk about the needs of the people in collaboration, right? What are the needs you find of organizations to be able to collaborate? Because I find that there is a difference between those two.
So you're hitting on a pain point for me, because I used to work in nonprofit for so long, and I felt like we were in this constant survival mode, right? Because we're looking at the next funding opportunity. We're looking at, is funding drying up in this area? How do we shore up that gap? And so when you're in survival mode, you're not necessarily thinking, with your best self. And I think that that's the plight of all nonprofit organizations, for the most part. But organizations are run by people. And what we've learned here in Milwaukee specifically is transition happens. So people are going to different organizations. I think that we need to be tapped into more of a relational dynamic. Like there has to be agreement among people, not organizations or with organizations, because people run organizations. I say all of that to say the relationships that we have with each other, it dictates how we show up. So this is a pie in the sky thing, but if there's a funding opportunity that comes down, right, and there's organization A, B, and C that all want to apply for that, but we could, if we had a conversation, ask for a little bit of more money. We could come with a comprehensive plan to whatever philanthropic or governmental system and say, hey, nobody's going to apply for this in this community. We'd like it to be written this way, or this is what we think would be more beneficial to the bottom line. I think that collaboration requires for us to make concessions that way, but it's really hard when you see that you got general overhead, bills coming in and all that good stuff. Like the perfect world would be every grant that comes down, let's meet as a community and talk about whether or not this helps everybody or this fits the bottom line. And I struggle with that a great deal because just in the seats that I've sat in, I don't think that community understands how much they're subject experts on all things community, right? Like you truly dictate the terms. If they could use their voice in unison, I think that they'd have a greater return on investment when it comes to dealing with systems. There's so many people that have their own seasoning to how they want to go about it, that's where you see those break-off points, those small, disagreements that you mentioned earlier that creates smaller tables that have, less impact when it comes to talking to those systems. So I just think that we have to think as humans more and have, human agreements, community agreements, as opposed to this is what our organization is going to stand on, because executive director can become of organization A can become executive director of organization B tomorrow. So what are they taking, with them?
Yeah. Talk about the philanthropy. That was actually my next question. Have you heard or been in conversations with philanthropic partners about some of these topics?
Yeah.
Here's what they say.
Once I got jobs where I had access to talk to people that were in philanthropy, I mean, I try to beat the dead horse. I went to a conference in Philadelphia. The Beaumont Foundation hosted it. It was a Build Challenge convening for a grant that was national. So we met with all the folks that received the grant and were reporting out on the successes, some of the issues or challenges, but really just information sharing, systems thinking. And they talked about how they were trying to turn upside down the paternalistic way in which dollars are distributed to community. And it really came with more community conversation as those grants were being put together. They weren't trendy. They were continuations of other grants to make sure that they were complementing the dollars that they had already given. And it was led by two dynamic Black people, right? Brittany and Zamir were the faces of this conversation. And so for me, yes, long way of answering. I have tried to talk to as many people in philanthropy as possible. You see great things happening for GMF. They got some great humans that are doing work around the community. Burke Foundation, Bader. I think it's changing. You know what I mean? And we have to be okay with the incremental, steps toward that change.
Yeah. I know one thing that I would love to see happen here is for us to be a strong part of pushing back against the model of we just submit answers and follow along with whatever funders are asking, and we just play the game because that's just the way that we have to get funding. But then in doing that, everything kind of stays the same. And so how is that balance between we need to exist still, but we also want things to change? How do we kind of have both of those without feeling that risk that if we don't play the game, we might not make it to this collective, better stage? So that's a conversation. I don't have any answers for that necessarily. I'm just trying to really pay attention to what how we can get enough stability and really trust. Like, I think that's a big part of it, right? For me, if you're in a space where you can really believe and you can tell your rest of your team that we're going to take this path with this group and we believe it's going to work out in the end for all of us, but we don't know, like, that's all built on trust, right? Because I have a high risk tolerance, right? There's a line from one of the poems by, it's called If, by Rudyard Kipling, I believe. And one of the lines he has, if you can, like, roll all of your fortunes in one roll of dice, right? And if you lose it all, be okay the next day, then something about, like, that ability to approach life like that is powerful. Yeah. And I wouldn't say I would roll dice on all of my finances, but like, I definitely would bet a lot on certain things just because I'm going for something that I think can elevate everything. And so, that trust factor, though, I think.
Well, and folks want return on their investment, right? Yeah. And I've talked to some people in philanthropy that have said, hey, there's been tens of millions of dollars thrown at this challenging community, and we haven't seen any change. And I think that that's why community, input on how dollars come down, how it's distributed, it's going to get there at some point. I think, like I said, I just see those changes. I see program officers way more embedded in community than I've ever seen before. I think that boat being rocked is happening right now. Like, we're a part of it. The reason why you're a top in organization and so many other different initiatives is because of that thought process. I think that we're here, and I think, if you look at history, I don't think that any of the history makers realized that history was being made in that moment. No, you know what I mean? So 10 years from now, 25 years from now, folks might be looking at some of the work that you've done and saying, hey, that was the shift right there where we started, because I think you had a lot of relationships with folks in philanthropy too.
Yes and no. Yeah, I feel like it could be more, but I do.
Well, when I was in case management, like, I felt like I had no connection to anybody. Like, when we had meetings and we were in rooms, I'm like, wow, you're the person that signs the check. Like, you're the person that sends it down to us. And I've tried to utilize my access to be like, come to this happy hour, come to this coffee chat, and there's going to be a program officer or officers here. Here's some frontline, case management staff that can talk to you and give you a perspective that you probably won't get, because some of that information is lost in translation once it gets to the executive level, and I just think that, giving folks access to talk to people that are doing the work, are working with community members is just beneficial to the bottom line for philanthropy to make the best decisions when it comes to distributing money down the line. Yeah.
I wish there was, maybe there is, let me know if this is a pointless hope that already exists, but something that would clearly, maybe a video or something, this demonstrates how money gets to programs, why some programs don't get money. Like, some of this stuff is really, when you're trying to figure something out, there's no simple pathway to, like, I'm going to go get this and then next year we'll be here. Like, you're just scrambling, just hoping that stuff comes together. That's kind of the problem-solving mentality. Yeah. But as a funder, like, if I put myself in the position of a program officer or a funder now, having been in this world a bit, I'm like, actually, the stuff that I used to be annoyed by from the funding world, I get now. So if I'm giving money out, I want to see you work a little bit, right? Yeah. I don't want to just be like, oh, you got a new program? That's cool. Here's money. Like, everybody has a new program or a new idea. Like, what is it going to be different about you going from idea to starting something, LLC, EIN, to then, like, you actually getting that to happen? Because that's what the work is, right? Like, there's no easy way to actually make the outcomes come. Yeah. So none of this should just be a simple, like, oh, I'll reward you because you want to change your life. So there's an element to it that I think people don't grasp when they get into the nonprofit space. And there's a lot of cynicism in the nonprofit space. Some of it justified, but a lot of it, I think, once you get in the rooms and you see how things work, you're like, I think I would do the same thing. Like, it's more complicated in some of these cases.
It's hard for me. This is probably an unpopular take to a lot of people, but they call our city the home of the nonprofit, right?
Yeah. And but I don't know, is that true though? I've heard, is that do we have the most nonprofits?
I don't know. It's just it's just a narrative that is carried on, or it's been carried on over the years. What I struggle with is folks starting organizations, from a pain point that they've identified or something that they want to get involved in. I have no problem with it, but there's another organization that might be doing similar work that you could be building your portfolio, as far as your body of work, building relationships. So when you do want to take that leap, now you've seen it from the ground. I know there's a lot of folks that there's athletes, after they leave their sports, they want to buy a car dealership or something. I heard of a couple of them that they start, at the car porter level. They learn every element of the job to make sure when they're running their car dealership, they know what they're talking about. They're not just some guy with a checkbook in his pocket. And I think a lot of people miss that element of it. Just learning the ins and out of it. Executive leadership is hard. I see organizations that are a mighty 2 or 3 that, with their powers combined, thinking like Captain Planet with another organization, another 2 organizations, they probably could do a lot more in terms of the lift that they're trying to undertake. And when you talk about collaboration, I think that that's one of the most painful things that I see in community. Like, just because my seasoning is a bit different in terms of how I want to show up, with my service, that means that I have to have a completely different thing to this organization. And what it does is it creates scarcity in terms of funds and resources. And there's so many similar funding opportunities that multiple people want to go after. Now they consider themselves opponents, opposition to one another just because they qualify for the same funding. Yeah. I just think that there are a lot of organizations that probably could be consolidated into one organization. I think when you form a fist against anything, it's more impactful than just poking at an issue. There's so many dynamic humans that could be working at the same table. And like I said, community voice is important. So, you're telling any funding source that this is the way that we think we do it, and all these organizations and people say that this is what we believe too, you're probably going to get that shift. And I just think that it's easier for community not to be heard when there's so many different ways that you can, feed the need.
Yeah. No, what you say is a very important point that is one of my things that I could talk about a lot, but it does get into a point where you start saying things that people don't want to hear. And I've said this before. I remember I made a post one time when we hired some folks recently, and after we hired, I kind of just went through like my experience with it. And one of the things I said in there was that being formally incarcerated is not a skill. And I'm not hiring somebody because you're formally incarcerated, right? I'm hiring somebody because they understand that this position is more important than their experience, right? You cannot do any of these positions effectively if it's motivated by the pain that you feel from having gone through it. Because at some point, if not immediately, coming in, you have an ulterior motive, right? And there's going to be many moments in this work where you have to let go of your personal issue and you have to fight for somebody else's, right? And so if you can't do that, if it's always about like, but when does my thing come in? Like, maybe it doesn't, right? Like maybe we get to that down the road. I don't have an answer for you, but you have to be okay with the greater scheme of what we're doing if you're in these positions, and you have to do that with a high level of quality, right? Yeah. And so that's a very good point, is that people come in, and I only know specifically the world of reentry. Like people will come to me and say, I want to start this thing. My thing is always, one, see what exists first before you want to do anything. Yeah. Right? I can tell you right now, everything that you want to do exists. It might not be as high quality as you want it to be. It might not be as organized. That's fine. That's a different conversation. But don't just start something because you want to start something, right? Like, get a sense of what exists first. But then, two, to your point, is there's a very different strategy from getting to, solvency as a business to like profitability to $1 million. It takes different strategies. And so, same thing in the nonprofit space is, just because you have experience in an issue and you want to get involved and you can like talk to people, you can talk about the issue, managing people, that is a whole different world.
Skill sets.
Yeah. I've had to transform my entire existence in this space because now that I have a team, they have demands, they have needs, where before it was just me getting mad because I didn't have enough people, but now we're just staying up late. Like it was a different realm. Like I could do bad all by myself. I can't do bad with them. Like I have to do better by them. And that's why I'm right now trying to change, being on time for things more, having gaps in my schedule where I'm available for people. Like I can't do what I was doing before, right? Yeah. And so if you can't make those changes, if you're not able to like really acknowledge that my job now is more than anything else, it's not even about reentry. It's managing human beings who have needs in order to do their roles at a higher capacity. And that requires massive patience, compassion, being aware of like where I'm falling short. What do you need for today? Maybe you need today. All that type of stuff is different. And that's not what I necessarily expected coming into the role.
Yeah.
But that's what's needed now for the mission. And so like you got to be able to recognize that.
Being a people leader is tough. It's not for everybody. And I think that the toughest part about being in the nonprofit world, wanting to start a nonprofit, is you're doing it based on a passion that you have. And it's hard to turn off anybody's passion, right? But what you said is big, skill set. You could be very passionate about an issue. You might be even a great, ambassador of the messaging for whatever issue you want to tackle. But are you great as far as financial, management is concerned? Are you great if you're going to bring on staff and leading people even on their best days and your worst days, or vice versa? I think
you can't not as a leader be like, today I'm just gonna not show up. I'm gonna cuss somebody out. Like, no, that's go back to another level if you want to do that. Like, you can get a pass at that. You can't get a pass if you're running.
Yeah, I mean, I think that emotional intelligence and effective communication should be something that adults do on a regular basis, not just something that you learn in school to this end. Because I think that you said it earlier in the conversation when you talked about like some of the ups and downs or the pitfalls of collaboration. It's even just like getting somebody to come work for an organization that is aligned in your mission and your values, but I don't want to be beholden to coming at 9 to 5, right? Yeah. Or I want to be an executive level leader, right? Nobody jumps into community work to get paid, I don't think, because there's not a whole lot of money just sitting there for a lot of nonprofit organizations. We just talked about that a great deal. And so what is it? What is the love language that you're trying to appeal when it comes to talking to somebody? I know that I've been approached, hey, I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit. Can we sit down? Can we talk about, who I need to talk to, who's in? And to your point, I'm like, well, what already exists out here? But when somebody's speaking with passion first, it's really hard to get them to think, logically about the next steps, or why don't you go apply at this job? They're looking for a director of operations. You sound like you would be a great fit. Or why don't you become a program coordinator or manager at this organization? See what the world looks like before you just jump into this work assuming that you can do it.
Right. Yeah.
And again, that's not to take anything away from anybody. Like, you jumped into the world of community organization work and are thriving. And
that's a great point. I think about that a lot too, is like, it's hard for me sometimes to tell somebody, maybe you shouldn't do this, or it's because it's ideally, the path I took is not a common path, and it's not the wise path at all for people coming home. Like, I jumped into a variety of things and kept adding more on my plate. And most people coming home, the mass majority, when I tell folks, is come home and just be free. That's all you gotta do. Don't come home worry about starting something. Just come home and be free as much as you can. Yeah. And it's a scenario where it's situational, each individual. You have to know yourself. I had a very strong understanding of who I was. And I knew that I didn't care about a lot of the things that the free world had to offer me. I cared about these ideas. And those are my children in a way that I can't explain to most people. Yeah. So if you're not able to carry an idea the same way you would carry a child and have that responsibility, then chill for a little bit. Like, get yourself in a position where your balance or whatever that is for you is addressed. For me, it was just different. Like, that's what I needed more than anything, was that, to start getting into the work.
But it sounds like you had an appropriate village of people. Like,
yes, absolutely.
And that's big too. And so you said earlier that people have to come to their own conclusions.
Right.
There's no way that you can tell somebody they shouldn't start an organization.
Right.
There's no way that you can tell somebody that, what they plan to do as far as their community contribution isn't going to be effective in the way they want to do it. You got to help them or be a part of their village so they can come to their own conclusion. Right. And sometimes it's okay to fail. But one thing that I take very seriously is, like, we don't have time to play with community. You know what I mean? It's so, like, if you ain't got your stuff together, like, respectfully, align with somebody who does, sharpen your skill set, and then, try to start your own. But that, again, that's a very difficult conversation. And if you don't have a relationship with somebody, it ain't.
Yep. No, absolutely.
You just trying to keep me out.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Got that before for sure. Because then at a point, like, we become the gatekeepers. But I think that's a very important role, right? It's unfortunate to have, because, like, at a position of it, I'm basically saying, whether it's directly or like behind the scenes, I'm giving people opportunities. But I also know that folks that have recognized, if you are in a position, I'm going to give you every opportunity you can. I'm passing along everything. I'm trying to put you in position. So it's a matter of, like, just be ready. Like, just get yourself ready, because these things are going to come and we're going to need you. And that moment to kind of take over or get into a position that's going to come. But yeah, that's something I always struggle with, that, because, like, I genuinely am a gatekeeper now. But if we're going to have gatekeepers, I want them to at least be like very sincere and genuine. Because there's a lot of gatekeepers that aren't.
And I would say this, even the term gatekeeper is
like
derogatory, right?
Right.
To a lot of people just based on what it presents or the individuals that might come to mind or the type of individual that comes to mind when you say the word gatekeeper. I think that protecting the community's best interest is important. I don't think that you or I have the right to make that decision unilaterally if a person or an organization should be involved or tapped into this conversation. But I do think it is hard not to, you know what I mean? Because here's a couple of things that comes to mind when you're talking about gatekeeping or why it's been done over the last couple of years. First and foremost, if you let everybody in and you're not mindful of who you're letting in and what their relationships or what their conflict style is. You know, are there somebody that's going to take an idea from somebody and run with it? Because then that comes back to you. And so the next person or the next thing that you want to refer somebody to is just like, oh, well, the last person you referred, I'm in a lawsuit with them right now. Like, you know what I mean? Or the last person that you referred to this job, they don't even work here anymore. They did a no-call, no-show. And more than ever, that's something that sits on me because there's a lot of folks that reach out. Hey, Kyle, can you connect me to this person? Hey, Kyle, can you talk to this person? I'm like, cool. And typically I do it. You know what I mean? I might caution somebody like, okay, when you go into this conversation with this individual, you might want to, you know, because I don't want to be seen as a gatekeeper. But at the same time, I want my credibility to remain intact when there are things that are of high value to the community that can be contributed. So it's a fine balance. It's like walking a tightrope, like, and you never know how people digest that, you know. And I don't think I've been in a situation where I'm like, no, I'm not going to introduce you to this person.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've been the same way. What I have been in situations where somebody will say like, hey, we're working with so-and-so, and be like, there are very few people that I won't work with. Like almost one person. Right? There are people that won't work with me, which is unfortunate in scenarios that have been widely misunderstood, but it genuinely takes a whole lot for me to be like, nope, won't even do that again, right? But yeah, that's more so what it's been. Like, I don't think I've ever had a time where I'm like, nope, I definitely will not help you with that. I might like navigate that differently and say like, yeah, let me just check with them to make sure. Give me a little bit of information. And sometimes it's kind of like creating it so that I have that credibility still there. I'm like, hey, this is something going on. That's what they're trying to do. You make the decision here. I'm not saying two or not two. Like, I'm giving you what I got. Because like you said, it's important. This is too serious to plug people. This isn't my record label, right? This isn't my like Best Buy franchise. Bro, I'm not just trying to get you a job. Like, if you're not ready, we can talk about that conversation until you are. But like, don't try to just force your way into something because it's a gig. This ain't a gig, bro.
Well, and that makes me feel, or give folks that have been accused of gatekeeping, I give them grace, because you never know what situation or what bad experience they had by just offering up a connection that dictated how they show up. They're showing up moving forward from that experience. So, I mean, I know that one of the things I promised my wife when I first got the job with the governor's office was that I was not ever going to be a gatekeeper. I was going to try to give as much access to individuals, organizations, entities that may have never had a relationship with the governor's office. And I think it benefits both sides, right? Governor's office gets a more granular view of some of the things that they may not, have touch points with in community, grassroots organizations, some individuals just doing gigantic things and folks don't know about it. Being able to give them an audience like the policy team or the ledge team or the governor themselves, that's huge, right? But on the other side, like, they stand to gain too, because, wow, I can use this as a credibility, increasing my credibility in spaces where maybe I haven't had a seat at the table. Like we just had the governor come and tour here, right? So now, philanthropic organization B is like, let's have a conversation, right? So that means a lot to me, and to be able to, I guess, pay it forward, because I want others to do it, and I see so many people like connecting people like for nothing now. There's this book called The Good Giver, recommended. I won't say too much about it, but one of my colleagues from a previous employer told me to read the book. She was like, this reminds me a lot about a lot of you. And basically it's about giving without expectations. You know what I mean? There's a gentleman in the book who had all the access to everything in the world, and it was accessible. and he gave without expectations, and everybody knew that. And so even if things didn't work out, it was never held against him.
Yeah.
And I think that if we think more about our gives and not keeping score, I think that people give you grace if things don't work out.
Right.
Yeah. And so like gatekeepers, I give them grace. Trauma is real. Lived experience is real. You just said something about it being so valuable. But we need to have those conversations more loudly, about when it didn't work and how we can, not build a fence up around ourselves or armor ourselves up for the next opportunity. I think it's important to just talk about it.
Yeah. So just to clarify, the way I was using gatekeeper is the same as what you're saying, but we're not using the term gatekeeper. So I'm going to say like influencer or something in that realm. And what I find more so where my existence as an influencer is people come to me and say, hey, we got this position. You know anybody? So like now I'm sending people, or what do you think of this person? I don't know if they're best for this position. I think that person might be like, that's the space where I find myself at in that realm. And like you said, it's an important position. It's just, it doesn't leave the greatest taste in my mouth, but I know it is necessary in this space. And like you said, it gives you a lot more grace for the people that have made some of these bad decisions. When you get in these rooms, that's one thing I hope each individual learns quick, is that there's a whole lot more going on. There's a lot more grace that should be given to a lot of people making these decisions. Because this stuff is not easy. No. It is so difficult.
No, it's not. And most oftentimes you think of executive level leaders, they got so much on their plate.
Yeah.
Right? Not just the people leadership. They're thinking about funding. They got appearances that they got to make to keep on. Like, well, you're an executive leader. I'm preaching to the choir. But like, yes, I think grace is probably the most important thing that's come out of this conversation in terms of like just saying it for the camera. Like, give people grace. You never know what circumstance that they're dealing with. And, we haven't even touched on anything going on in folks' lives personally.
Yeah. So any questions you got for me? That's all we got for today, folks. So.
I think the only question I got for you is, if you could give me advice in terms of what has made your life meaningful, you know what I mean, when it comes to the space that you exist in. Collaboration aside, being an executive level leader is hard. Talking about the things that you talk to or speak to is hard. How do you savor victories?
Yeah. And there's a lot of times where I find myself asked the question that I feel like my answer is not helpful because I find that my experience and the way I digest the world, it can be very black and white in a lot of cases, which is interesting also because I live in the gray, not only because like, to get cliche and corny, I'm mixed and my Bitmoji is gray as well. But not just because I literally exist in the gray in that sense, but because for me, so many things are a matter of people, places, and things. Right? Like I put myself around better people. I mean, not like better, but like more stable people that are like gonna make sure my path is always, from the dumb stuff that I do, the mistakes that I make are going to be, weighed out more so by the people and the places that I'm around, right? I don't go out into positions and places where I'm likely to get into situations that are problematic, especially being on paper. That's always super conscious for me because I can get locked back up for allegation. And then the things like, what am I doing in my day? Is it, I've routinely struggled since I got out to have something I had in droves, which was in prison, which is ironic. I had peace. Like I genuinely had peace when I was in prison. And I have not had that as much since I got out. And it's because I'm just so inundated by these opportunities and this ability to make real this vision that I had for so long. When in prison, it was just like bit by bit. Oh, yeah, like that. A lot of reading, a lot of writing, meditating, exercise, getting outside. And so my day is just wrapped up in a way that I don't find the time unless I forcibly make it for those components, which for me is a little bit of sun, exercise a couple times a week, and eat breakfast before 12. Like if I get those basic things, like I'm pretty good, man. I can keep going like a racehorse. But that's really the things I think for me that have just been as simple as that. Beyond that, I think I have a really good ability for whatever reason. I have no pride. I have no pride in anything that I do. People get mad at me about that, but I genuinely don't, right? Everything that I do is because of positions I've been put in and things that have been given to me, right? I almost feel like an obligation to go on this path. It's almost like it's something I don't even have any control over a lot of times, right? It's just I naturally want to, and I'm given the opportunity, and I'm like, I'm one of them kiddie toys where you hit the button and it's just gonna go down the same track because that's what it was meant to do, and that's the only way it can go, and that's how I feel about it, and I enjoy it. I genuinely like when I'm getting the things I mentioned that I need. I'm enjoying it, right? That's just kind of the way I'm built.
Well, that's the reason I asked. As we like get close to the end of the conversation, I think it's important to know, like, when it comes to like people being able to collaborate, you hit it on two things: people knowing themselves and knowing what brings them peace, and actually being active around that makes you a better collaborator. And I wouldn't say you don't have pride in what you do. I just think that you approach it egolessly, and we have to think about doing that more. One of my mentors always told me, my community is my North Star at all times. So if you're having a bad boss situation or whatever, like if you're working within, in the confines of community, then if the community feels like you're doing great work, you're doing great work. But I think that the more people can have those outlets, like if you're living and breathing this, you're not going to show up for opportunities to collaborate the way you should. So like the reason I was asking about, that healthy coping mechanism is because I think us being free, being able to approach situations where it's just like, now let's talk about this big item. Let's talk about racial equity. Let's talk about reentry. Let's talk about, budget deficits here or over there. If you got that refuel, it's easier to have those conversations. And I think that there's so many people that don't get that. Yeah. And that's why collaboration is hard.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was gonna ask you what are you looking forward to, actually. So when you asked me that question, it reminded me. So we're like, what is your goal overall in the work that you've been kind of doing?
4 pillars that I sit on. I talk about it to a lot of people. One, building a better relationship to the state of Wisconsin on behalf of Milwaukee. I think that that's a responsibility of the entire community. I don't think that that's just on our elected officials. I don't think it's just on private sector businesses or the community-based organizations. I think that every single one of us has a responsibility to that. I think building and keeping a strong relationship to the governor's office is important. Just from a state relationship, I think that we speak fluent Milwaukee, and we need to diversify our language, opportunities. There's so much we can learn from other parts of Wisconsin that could benefit Milwaukee, and I think that there's a lot of conversations happening to that end right now, but I want to be somebody that contributes to that, so maintaining a relationship with the office, building a better relationship between Black and Brown. I think it's super important for us to be able to work together. I think that the conversation we had about collaboration, how philanthropic dollars, flow through community, that conversation weighs heavy on positive outcomes. And, being a Black person, the legacy of a Black-led Milwaukee, right? Like, how do we support the 2 elected principals that we have here at the county level and the city level? How do we make sure that, community is constantly in their ears in terms of what's working, what's not working, and how can we make sure that we ensure, Black and Brown people having the potential to be in those positions way beyond, Mayor Johnson or County Exec Crawley's time in office presently. So those are the 4 things that I kind of want to contribute at a high level to. So that's what I'm excited about.
I don't live my life by pillars. I feel like I'm lacking now. I just had like a pre-people problems mantra, so I'm gonna need some pillars. I need to create that in my life. All right, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kyle.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah,
yes, indeed.
for the work you do.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Same.
Yep. The story Kyle gave about bringing the hip-hop scene together to support each other with a set of guidelines going forward sums up why I wanted to talk to Kyle about this topic and what is missing and needs to occur among organizations in every issue. There is so much to say here, but so little clarity on how to do it, unfortunately. The spirit and principle of collaboration first is a cultural feature that needs to be infused in organizations from leadership down. I could explicitly state times when I have seen people in organizations operate from a competitive scarcity mindset that has been discouraging and poisonous. And I can also speak about times when I have seen people in organizations operate from a collaboration mindset that has been beautiful and inspiring. But I can also tell you times when people thought I may have been behaving from a competitive scarcity mindset. And it wasn't that way at all, but was guided by other factors that they weren't aware of, or they didn't care to learn, which is a bigger problem. I always want to discuss these matters when someone is confused by my words and actions. If there was any guidance or commentary I could give, for whatever it's worth, to other leaders, potential leaders, or frontline team members involved in community work, it's that nothing we do matters if it's not part of a collective effort. This may sound like hyperbole, but I truly believe that every project or organization I am involved in is largely irrelevant if it's not a part of a larger ecosystem of efforts and organizations to create sustainable systems change. After being a part of our collective here, where we have our office and we record our podcast, I can never go back to just focusing on the goals of our organization. If there's one thing anyone takes away from this episode, my hope is that it is a willingness to engage and take risks from the foundation of collaboration, and an understanding that not only can organizations and efforts do better together, but we cannot succeed unless we are together in addressing the issues within communities. And at the same time, because two things are almost always true at the same time, not everyone or every organization is in a position to be a part of a collaboration, and it is necessary to face that difficult conversation with grace. How we don't work together can be just as important as how we do work together. Again, how and when individuals and organizations collaborate and choose not to collaborate is entirely situational. I have been on both sides of it. But it is the belief in and commitment to collaboration as a principle that is non-negotiable and will guide us through the complexities. Thank you for listening. Peace.